Well, welcome to you. Welcome back, and good morning again for those of you in the UK, and good evening for those in New Zealand and other parts of the world. To the next session, which is understanding on how to build brand trust with the Australian customers to get cut through and position your brand to land with your target audience. I promised a great panel for you this evening, and I'm going to deliver on that. We've got an outstanding panel of real experts with some fantastic experience in the fintech community here in Australia and from parts of the world. I'm going to introduce the panel members very briefly, and then I'll get them to actually introduce themselves in a little bit more detail so you really understand that experience they bring to the table. So first of all, I'm going to introduce you Josephine Tu. Josephine Tu is Agile Growth Partner, Implementer and Coach at Sophos Advisory. Welcome, Josephine. And after Josephine, I'm going to welcome Alex Twigg. Now, Alex is the co-founder and advisor with Judo Bank. Judo Bank, for those that you don't know, is an incredibly successful neobank that caters for the SME market here in Australia. He's also the founder and CEO of Shift Happens Group, the co-founder with also Ubank. Ubank was a digital bank as part of NAB and a board advisor in multiple fintechs. He's got a real track record of being a fintech founder here in Australia, and a very successful track record. He brings a wealth of experience, years of experience, and a fair bit of scar tissue, I suspect, as well. We'll explore that a little bit later with Alex. And also David Engel is the Business Development Manager of FinTech at AUS. And of course, AUS is one of the most successful digital platforms here in Australia that many fintechs use and are using very successfully. I've got some experience with that myself, and it's great. And also Craig Stockdale is the commercial director with Newfound, and is going to give you some advice in this session on how to utilise the services that Newfound has got across the disciplines that we're going to discuss. Josephine, for our participants, can you just give us a 1 or 2 minute overview of what you've been doing and why you're well credentialed to be sitting on this panel, maybe for the last 10 or 15 years, what you've been doing?
Well, I think my claim to fame really is that I was employee #1 for a company called Infosys 20 years ago. So go to market for Singapore, go to market for China, and go to market for Germany when they grow from 100 million to 1 billion. So that was 3 markets. And then with regards to FinTech, I was a group executive for a FinTech Global 100 company that bought a bunch of FinTech companies that service financial services market. And we brought 2 companies into the Australia market itself. I head the Asia Pacific region. That was my background in terms of experience of go-to-market with different cultures and countries. And now I'm a strategist and I work with a growth stage company to scale and grow.
Excellent, excellent. So just a little bit of experience there, and again, probably a bit of scar tissue as well. Alex, just give us a little bit more background. I've given some detail about what you've done there, but just give us a little bit of background. How long have you been innovating and been FinTech launching in the Australian market?
Well, it probably goes back pre-Australia. So I was very lucky to be part of the team that helped launch Egg Bank in the UK nearly 20 years ago now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Came to Australia 12 years ago to help launch Ubank for NAB, was the CEO of that for 6 years. Then went on to help co-found and launch Judo Bank, which has been the last 5 years worth of work for me, which has been a lot of fun. And in the middle of all of that, I've run my own software company. I have helped and advised many fintechs and an angel investor in a few as well here in Australia. I'm also on the board of FPOS, which is Australia's homegrown payments network, like Visa or MasterCard. So I've just had a lot of fun for the last 20 years, really. Running around trying to do silly things, and
a lot of energy as well.
Yeah, and most recently, I've sort of set up my own advisory and consultancy business called Shift Happens, trying to help others do similar silly things.
Excellent, just like you haven't had enough. David, you've got a pretty extensive experience here to bring to this discussion as well. Just give us a little bit of background so the participants can ask you and direct their questions to you when that time comes.
Sure, no worries. So started out, spent about 10 years managing different cards portfolios for GE Capital. So GE Capital is one of the largest non-bank lenders. It's now rebranded to Latitude Financial Services in Australia. So I managed some of their card portfolios and ran their payment innovation business. Then jumped from corporate into startups and co-founded a startup called Dashi, which is a hospitality tech startup, and then helped to establish and run several global fintechs in Australia. So I was a country manager for I2C, which is one of the global card platforms, card issuing platforms, and then was commercial director for a fintech called Verency, which is based out of Melbourne. I then jumped back into corporate at AWS, where I am now, and my role really has two parts. So one is helping to accelerate the growth of Australian fintechs, and that includes customer connections, looking for partnership or distribution opportunities, investor connections or investor introductions, and general fintech advice. And then on the other side is focusing on strategic initiatives. So unsurprisingly, most of my time this year has actually been spent on open banking. So helping AWS customers to accelerate their ability to join the open banking ecosystem. So both data holders, so those are the APRA regulated banks that are required to share the data, but then also data recipients who are going to be governed by the Australia Consumer Competition Commission and are the ones who will be consuming that data. So that's actually what's consuming most of my time. So if people have questions about open banking, I'm more than happy to go deep on that.
And that will be a theme again tomorrow night as well. This open banking opportunity is huge. It gets technical, it gets difficult, and it's full of regulatory speak, but it's actually a great opportunity. Craig, just explain what you do at Newfound and how you can help the participants when they need help.
Sure. So my background's been working with early stage companies and bringing them into the Australian, New Zealand, and certainly across the Asian Pacific territory. So I've done about 14 incubations over that period of time, different technologies, mainly orientated towards the data center. I've also worked as CEO of a couple of public companies here in Australia earlier in my career. But like Alex, decided to set up my own practice, and now I'm forming part of Newfound's solution to the market. In the financial services sector, I've helped incubate and set up pipelines for a lot of clients inside some of the major banks here. Of course, you know who the four big ones are, and then the tier twos. So I've spent a lot of time climbing around some of those organisations and meeting people, and obviously takes a lot of work and effort. Yeah, I mean, being part of Newfound is, you know, we provide best of breed. You know, it's really a one-stop shop. So if someone's looking to establish themselves in the market here, there are many ways to do so. And Newfound is a very good partner from you know, research all the way through sales strategy and go to market, and we can help assist any of those organisations looking to do so. Excellent.
Now, Josephine, when we were practicing this session, there were some really clear things that came out of the discussion that we had. To me,
is it the blurb that you wrote? Yeah,
sorry,
okay, I did see that.
Sorry, we can hear you, Lily.
Okay, I'll forward it onto mine.
Josephine, we talked about focus.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'll just
one sec. No, I can't.
Yeah. So, Josephine, we talked about focus and focusing on the right things. When obviously when companies are starting up, they've got limited resources, they've got limited time, they have to make the most of opportunity. Can you talk to us about what we discussed about focus? And I'll get Lily off the line.
Sorry, Dave, was it from you? I did see something, but I think
you can mute her or something. Are you the organizer? Somebody quick message her.
I am. I've just messaged her.
I think we're talking about building trust in the beginning when you have limited resources and you're coming to market, right? So one of the things about building trust, I think, is that you need to have clarity to know.
I did see it. Yeah, I did.
And there's a difference.
Okay, let me forward this to Lauren.
There's a difference for a lot of startup in terms of knowing who they are as a company.
Yeah. Doing the circuit, as I say, yeah. Transform.
So,
Okay.
questions going.
There we go. Okay, keep going, Josephine.
So that is
So-
the. Okay.
What happened is a lot of startups are focused on the product design, which is really product functionality.
I'm excellent. Journey to the centre of virtual care and what it takes or to get there. Which thing did they go with, Jen? Title. Just forward me. Just copy and paste the thing because I'm just forward it on to Lauren. Thank you. All right, I'll speak to you in a bit. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Luli, we can hear you. Can you please turn your mic off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Luli.
That's better. Now, go.
Yeah, so I think the focus is that I think you need to have clarity in terms of who they are as a company, you know, what they stand for, what do they believe in, how do you build trust, right? Because for people, like, we need to know who you are, not what you do. And a lot of people focus on what they do. That's good. But I think that trust, it means that, you know, we need to know who you are so that we can relate to you. So your clear point of view, a clear what you stand for, what you believe in is really important to identify and have clarity as a company beyond the product. That's one. Second thing is when you know who you are, you need to find your tribe. So when you go to market, you need to find the people the partners that really resonate with the problem you're trying to solve, what you stand for, and it's in alignment with, I think, all the technology stack and whatever that, you know, that's in alignment with your values. So your SI partners, your product partners, your technology partners, as well as your domain partners, your consulting partners, you need to find a tribe in market, because a lot of time you don't have the reputation and as well as the, I call it the budget as well to wine and dine the client. So in some way you got to piggyback on your partners. So you need to find that tribe. And to find a tribe, you need to know who you are. And the third thing to build trust then is you need to show up consistently. As we say, this is a relationship market and it's a trust market. Unless you show up consistently with the tribe together and collaborate in your behaviors, it's going to be difficult, I think, for the big guys in terms of enterprise to want to work with you.
Good points there. Good start. Alex, there's a lot of things there that Josephine just touched on, which I saw with judo from scratch. Can you just tell us about what the focus was like at judo? Because it has been an outstanding success. There's no question about that. I've known Joseph Healy, who was your partner there at judo for many, many years. He talked about the focus on SME banking way back in NAB days, 15, 16, 17 years ago. Just tell us about the focus there at judo and what it was like. You're on mute, Alex. You're on mute.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Look, we set out 5 years ago to build an SME bank focused on the SME segment in Australia, because we saw a very significantly underserved gap in the market that had been there for 10, 15 years and was growing bigger and bigger every day. And we focused entirely on that. That's what we set out to do right back at the beginning. It's what we told our investors we were going to do. And the thing that, Joseph actually tells a really nice story about, meeting some of the investors for the third and fourth time, or the potential investors for the third and fourth time. And they get out their big leather books and, flick back to the time they saw you 6 months ago, and they'd say, "Oh, that's interesting." And we'd say, "Why?" And he said, "Well, this is what you told me last time, and this is what you've done this time." And every time you came back with the same story. He said, "We hear so many people that come back with, with a different story every time they come to see us, and that just never fills us with confidence." And we always knew that was the segment we were going after. We knew exactly how to go after that market, and we executed on it. And focus for me is absolutely critical. Making sure you understand your market, making sure exactly who isn't your market, and really focusing down on that is really hard. Now, again, just for context for the people on the end of the call, Judo Bank is a neobank, and when most people think about neobanks, they think about, you know, digital banks and everything else that goes along the way. Judo has a very different proposition. It is a high touch, high relationship, judgment-based lending business that's all about face-to-face, long-term relationships with people. However,
that's old school.
That's old school. but it's what SME banking customers want, right?
And need.
And you know, they have highly complex needs, which is, you know, really difficult to do digitally. And they actually want to trust somebody, they want to talk to somebody, they want to build a relationship over time and help them build their businesses. What we did was we basically took that as the essence of the proposition, and then built a business around that and used technology behind that front line, behind those bankers, to actually automate everything behind the banker. So there's an enormous amount of technology inside Judo, but we put the front end, if you like, on that technology, which is what customers want, which is the human interaction relationship, to do highly complex business with those SME customers. So, and we've never faltered from that. You know, we had so many people tell us, you know, oh, you need to do, you know, you need to be 100% digital. It will never succeed. You know, this is old-fashioned banking. And we said,
I was going to ask you, did you have a lot of doubters when you first came up with this model? Because I heard doubters out there, and I thought to myself, well, I know Joseph pretty well, and I know what he's good at, and he's bloody good at SME banking. You need to be knowing your stuff if you're going to doubt Joseph and your team as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we got laughed out of places early on, you know. So you want to look, you know, our sort of, you know, our tagline to begin with, which I think we borrowed from somebody else, was, you know, banking as it used to be, banking as it should be. Right, you rock up with that tagline to a lot of folk 5 years ago, and they literally would laugh you out of the room.
Excellent.
But you know, we had to stick. We knew exactly what we needed to do. You know, we knew exactly what the market was, and we had to execute on that, and that's the way we would be successful.
Excellent, David. Focus and the organisations that you're working with, you'd have enough experience now to know what, when you see companies coming to you with plans, you'd have a feeling for, you know, what their focus is like there. Is that something that you're able to recognise early on?
So in terms of the kind of focus that successful companies have? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sorry, did you want to add to that?
You go. I'm trying to establish, is it something that is relatively clear when somebody sits down to you and first of all presents to you what they want to do on your platform? Is that something that you're recognizing straight away? Is it something you have to flesh out what it is that their value proposition is and also their focus?
The good ones you can tell that they have the focus straight away. I mean, I think Judo is a really good example of what you're talking about there, where from day one had a very, very clear value prop for a very, very clear market segment that they were going after, and they just kind of were head down and went after it and successfully went after it. I think what you see from other neobanks in Australia, or other, let's say, consumer fintechs in Australia, is that very often they will take a less sophisticated segmentation view of the market. And as a result, you can see their products kind of chopping and changing, their market value prop, or I should say their segmentation chopping and changing a little bit. So I think, look, it's no secret that the most successful businesses are the ones that are hyper-focused. And I think the thing that, we spoke about this previously about Australia, is that, especially if you're B2B focused, you have to understand the market very, very well. And you have to be very clear about the segmentation that you're going after, because it's not such a large market that you can kind of spray and pray. You know, if you're coming in here and you're selling to banks, for example, or insurers, for an example, you need to have a crystal clear idea about who you want to be selling to and what your value prop is to them. Because, like any business with lack of clarity around their customer segment, you're going to end up spinning a lot of revs, just kind of, wasting time on conversations. And the thing about Australia is that everybody's happy to have a conversation. They're actually very open to having conversations. A lot of times they're not great at giving you a hard no. So what you end up doing is you end up getting very soft maybes. and you'll just end up spinning wheels on a deal that, you know, when you work it out 9 months from now, was never really a deal to begin with. So I think back to your focus, your question on focus, it really comes down to your understanding of the Australian market and kind of your ability to go after it and execute on it very precisely.
Craig, are you starting to have some much more direct conversations now in this COVID environment where, you know, and the research has shown that we're making decisions and doing things in 6 months that might have taken 5 years previously?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the whole COVID paradigm has just changed, I think, the way we all do business now. It's very, very different. I was just thinking back, I think the last face-to-face meeting I had was in February of this year. So, you know, the way of building relationships, which is what, you know, it's been about in this industry, and to, you know, Alex will tell you that the market's pretty small in Australia. So a lot of people, you know most people know each other. You know, whether in technology or in fintech, you know, it's pretty clear that, you know, networking is important, knowing who the right people are. But from a COVID point of view, yeah, it's certainly changed the landscape. And, you know, it's changing the landscape for companies who might be considering coming down here, because initially they might have thought, well, you know, should I be looking to hire some executives immediately and get started by putting an additional large cost into the business before I even kick that off? One of the things that we're doing at Newfound that I'm sort of driving with the organisation is this thing called a virtual subsidiary, where the plan is that we can actually connect you to the right people. So use subject matter experts, identify who your target customers are, what's your value proposition, and start to build a pipeline for you straight away. The idea then is that as we build that pipeline and hopefully close some of those negotiations for you, you can then start to look at putting more money in and investing. So take the risk out by hiring the experts, but at the same time, you know, doing it in a controlled manner, so that you don't you know, you don't extend yourself, which I think is really important.
Josephine,
and I would just,
Craig,
sorry, Andrew, I'd just love to add one thing to what Craig is saying, just around kind of selling to Australia and accelerating that, and the impacts of COVID. Australia is an incredibly relationship-focused way of doing business. We like to have coffees. I say we, I sound American, I'm Australian now. We like to have coffees. It can take 2 or 3 meetings with people just to kind of get around to really getting to the crux of the deal. And what COVID has done is it's removed that. So all of a sudden deals have to be done virtually. Oftentimes it makes it harder to get into people's calendars and things like that. So I think the point that Craig is making around leveraging local support to accelerate your ability to get that network is actually probably doubly important than what it was pre-COVID. So I think, you know, I just want to make that point that what Craig is referring to here is really, you know, can be a matter of success or failure in the market, is your ability to tap into those networks, you know, from the get-go rather than having to build them up yourselves.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful segue into the next part of my questions, which is hiring and working with the right resources and partners, Josephine. And particularly when you're small and delicate, you know, the next stage of who you're going to work with down here is really vitally important, because it'll make or break a business pretty quickly. You've got a lot of experience in who to partner with and picking whether it be technology partners, platform partners, and resources. What as a fintech startup, what's the sort of thing that you're looking for in the Australian context when, say, you're looking to work with technology partners, for instance?
Yeah, I think that if people are coming into Australia, and for example, I think some already have an established partners, like they have consulting partners, SI partners that also have local operation in Australia. Obviously, it's a natural extension for them to say, how can we extend the partnership into Australia, and can we connect with the in-market country managers, you know, to work through them, for example, right? And I think that Australia, you have to work with partners, because first and foremost, you are not here. And if you're small and you have no reputation, you also do not have like I said, the budget to wine and dine. In some way, you sort of is depending on the partners who already have the connection, have the relationship, maybe the budget like AWS, you know, that can actually already have established relationship, and also the intelligence and the insight in market that you can't Google. because a lot of stuff you can do research on Google, but the market insight of people, the deal flow, you know, the problems they're having, the relationship, the pain, the difference between the CBA and the Westpac, and the details of all of that, you have to get it through partners first. So I think building relation first with the partners is key to Australia before you plot out the strategy to get to the clients to actually sell to them. And if you could, I say sell together with partners and collaborate. That would probably be even better. Does that sort of
Alex, yeah, it does, makes a lot of sense. Alex, you've been on all sides of the equation. You've been the recipient of fintechs pitching you. You've worked in big banks, NAB particularly, and then started up a digital bank within a bank, and then you've started up your own bank, which is not necessarily a digital bank, but you've also had to buy a lot of technology. What do you want to see when fintechs are coming into the country to establish that, first of all, they've got credibility, also they've got focus, but also, you know, they're going to be someone that you can work with, even though they're brand new in the country? What do you look for?
It's always a compelling proposition. You know, I sort of build on what Josephine said earlier on. I mean, I will always take much more notice of a friend or a colleague or an acquaintance that rings me up and says, yeah, you need to speak to Bob, you know, because that's you know, that becomes, that referral is much more advantageous than, you know, the endless, frankly, spam that you get from everybody on the planet that, you know, thinks they got the best thing and wants to talk to you, right? And unfortunately, 99 times out of 100, you know, they're utter rubbish. You know, you know, and I don't say that in any way derogatory, but you know, you talk to a lot of folk and they haven't thought about their proposition. They haven't thought about how they're actually going to turn this into a commercial proper reality, how they're going to deliver on it, how they're going to create some real value for it, how they're going to actually they've done enough understanding of your business to be able to see how it could be valuable to you. And that is the biggest detractor and turn off from a lot of these conversations is around this stuff. You know, but if you've got somebody that comes to you that, you know, has a really strong value proposition, understands their business model, understands how that can contribute to your business model, and more importantly, how it can contribute to your customers' experience or customer value proposition, then you can have a really strong conversation. But you know, it's as I think David said earlier on, Australia is all about relationships, right? You know, until you've built those, until you've created that sort of network effect and know who's in the market and how it works, you won't succeed. I mean, I'm from the UK originally, spent, you know, 40 years there. I worked in the City of London. You know, you wander around the City of London and you can smell the deals getting done, right? You're lucky if you know 5% of the people in there, right? Here, I came to Australia, you know, 12 years ago, and within 2 years, I knew 70-80% of all the players in all the organisations. You know, you've just got to build those relationships and know how it works, and also know, because it's a small environment, you have this. You know, everything's entwined, everything's interrelated, and you've got to understand a lot of that to be able to really sell in properly and really understand how you can make those connections. But it's, you know, but I keep coming back to, and it comes back to your first point earlier on about focus. It's just about as much about focus, about who you're selling to and why you're selling to them and how you can help them, as it is about, I've got some sexy technology. Which is a way a lot of conversations start.
Yeah. Craig, that kind of alludes to Uli's last session, which was about the value of the research. before you even get here. And Uli spent a lot of time in breaking down how they actually go through the research. A company's still doing that these days, is trying to get into a market where they actually have done the essential research and just got a good map and landscape of what's going on here in Australia and their unique value proposition.
Yeah, generally speaking, Andrew, those that don't do their research are the ones that fail, right? And, you know, we see it. I've seen it a number of times in my space. They've just gone about it the complete wrong way. So, you know, what we learned earlier about research is fundamental. I was previously CEO of Forrester Research. Forrester Research was a firm that, you know, I brought down here to Australia, and we established them and set them up, and they're in the tech sector. And we used to hire all the brightest kids out of Harvard and out of MIT in Boston. And, you know, they had their own language, but they thought about, you know, they never sat on the fence. They always, you know, told you what they thought about a particular market or a particular product or a service or a vertical. And interestingly enough, Microsoft was the biggest, I'm sorry about that, but Microsoft, the biggest buyer of that research at the time, because we were, you know, bagging them quite frequently. And so they needed to, read. Yeah, they needed to read the research so that they were across what was going on. So look, research is fundamental. And one of the things that Newfound do is, you know, we have this go, no-go market strategy. So the idea here is that, you know, we'll look at a company, we'll look at their strengths, their, you know, what they've done around their marketplace in other markets. And then we'll look to adapt that down here for them to the local markets. And each market's different. I mean, if you take Asia Pacific, for instance, you know, there's 14, 15 different countries, each with their own nuances, you know, cultures, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, if you've got a product and you're looking to go into a new market, my strong belief is that research is fundamental. Based on creating a blueprint of your research, you can then use that blueprint to go to the executive team and gain their sign-off to then actually incorporate and put some funding across to actually launch your expansion plan. And that is fundamental. So having a good blueprint which is backed up by some really good research, I think is fundamental for your success.
Excellent.
And you mentioned, do you mind, I might just
jump in there, David, please.
Yeah, just one thing to what Alex said, just around, you know, one of the things one of the helpful ways to sell into the Australian market. Australian financial service companies are both culturally and by regulatory design risk averse. So you will rarely see Australian banks being the first movers on technology, and this is from the big four all the way down to, you know, tier 3 mutuals and things like that. So, you know, one of the things that I actually found quite helpful when I was selling into the banks is actually leading with some customer examples that they would actually have heard of. So if you've got customer examples that, I mean, customer examples, that it's no secret, right? You want to have customer case studies to sell, but if you've got customer examples that will resonate or will be known to the people that you're reaching out to, you actually want to have those fairly prominently in your introduction email, in your pitch, you know, if you reach out to them on LinkedIn, wherever you can, because that is one of the strongest signals to a buyer that you're reducing the risk because someone else has bought it before. And, you know, as I said, that's no secret, that works everywhere. But in Australia, where you do get, you know, a level of risk aversion that you don't necessarily experience in the UK or in the US, it's really helpful to be able to lead with those kinds of examples.
Yeah, David, that also brings trust, and confidence, right, sure, in what you're presenting. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's there's no question. I mean, banks are risk warehouses, effectively. Alex, you've worked in many banks before. I'd imagine when you started up UBank, you had to have some difficult conversations with some of the more senior risk experts at NAB, and I'm sure with investors as well. But banks are not renowned for being great on innovation or great on trying new things. That's for sure. I mentioned, we've talked about networks before. Alex, where's the easiest place to find those networks, and what are the networks that you find most useful and why in the Australian banking sector? You've been through that. I know it was 15 years ago, but you know, how do you find the best networks?
Great question. I mean, this is obviously a great place to start, but the the really good thing to do is there's reach out through the fintech hubs. There's plenty of those out here, and there's plenty of people that are engaged in those from the big banks. Most of the big banks have generally got somebody that's almost residential in those fintech hubs to help those conversations along. Get involved in some of the community groups that are going on in your particular space of interest. That's the other way, and there's plenty of those out there that are useful. And start, selling in Australia, and even just doing business in Australia is a team game. It's a team sport. Building relationships with, David's a great example from AWS. There's other examples in Microsoft. You're using those connections to, introduce other connections and start that process off. The other places to go, I've used extensively the Institute of Directors here, which is a really, you don't have to have taken the exams to join up to that, but it gives you great networking opportunities through those. And the other places to think about, it's always worth. I know, Andrew, in your previous life, going along to some of the ABNF events and building the networks those ways are really also very helpful. But it really comes back to Jocelyn's original point. It's all about a team game and finding those advisors and finding those people that can introduce you and give you the credibility that you need coming into this market.
Yeah. And Josephine, just from your perspective, what networks have you found most effective specifically here in Australia, and who would you recommend some of our fintechs tap into?
Yeah, I think that is really dependent on their business and the business model, right? I mean, you can see that some of them could be selling to SMEs. I think there's a company from InsurTech, they sell to SME brokers. So from that perspective, I find Australia very members and association focus. Australia has a lot of members and association, you know what I mean? So
there's a peak body for everything, isn't there?
It's like, yeah, I know there's unit for everything. So I think that from that perspective, you just need to go to those community and association that is relevant to your business and business model. Obviously, if you're in the enterprise space itself, all the technology partners and all the stacks that you can find, will be good possible partners. I think that I find that not only for partners, but I think that with regards to knowing who are the clients and who are the decision makers, you're not going to really meet decision makers in a meetup. I mean, some of you are like, Alex is probably not going to be there. You know what I mean? You meet partners, technology partners, salespeople in meetup so that you can build a network, so that you can find the intelligence and the deal flow and the knowledge is what's happening of the insights. But in terms of decision makers, you probably would know from the salespeople who is the decision maker for this specific product and give you the name, though they will not refer you to the decision maker. So you then have to do the reach out yourself and to have a clear proposition when you reach out to them. That's what I find that could be helpful, because again, you don't have the brand and the reputation for people to actually refer you yet. So I guess a mix of a different approach is gonna get you the best outcome.
Yeah, and the downside of a close network is you don't get too many chances to stuff it up. So if you're going to make that approach, to Alex's point, I think is that if you're going to make an approach to a decision maker, make it stick, because you won't get a second chance, I suspect. David, digital environment here in Australia, how would you describe the digital environment here in Australia compared to some of the international markets? Because there's sometimes misconceptions around that, isn't there?
Yeah, so I think that you can segment it, right? So I think retail banking is probably world leading. So just the digital front ends that the big four have, so the big four banks and really the mid-tier banks would be world leading just in terms of digital engagement. Equally, the application process, so origination is pretty good. In the SME space, it's less strong, although we're seeing some newcomers starting in that space. So Judo Bank, they would put their hands up and say that they're not a digital first bank. They're a relationship first bank, but they have digital capability off the back end. But what we're seeing is there's still really a gap that hasn't yet been filled, more around the, Judo's SME market is like 10 million revenue plus. There's a lot of companies that are less than 10 million revenue that are just massively underserviced, both from a lending perspective and a digital perspective. So I think there's an opportunity there. Insurance is still very poor, very backwards. So you're starting to see some B2B players. Cover Genius is a good one. Cover Hero is another one. Effectively, they're not underwriters. They're just putting a digital front end, but I think that there's still room in the insurance space. And then the other one I would call out is wealth management. So you're starting to see some more wealth management digital investment apps. So Superheroes just launched. Stake is another one where you can do micro investments in the US. But wealth management is another area where other than kind of robo-advisory apps, you're probably seeing a lack of maturity or what you would call kind of 10 out of 10 UX on that, in that area as well.
Yeah, and Cover Genius is actually talking tomorrow on this event as well, which is great.
They're a great company.
And the digital infrastructure, and clearly you're a part, AWS is part of that. How would you describe the digital infrastructure and what you can get here in Australia compared to some international markets? Improving
greatly. So again, if we just kind of break it down, so open banking will be world leading when it launches. The amount of data that is being mandated by the ACCC to be shared, so transaction history, a whole range of different assets are to be shared, credit cards, business lending. So that will be world leading. Although payments is not yet allowed. So there's not yet right there, but that's also, we've now got the new payments platform, which is going to be real-time payments. So moving away from the old DE infrastructure. So that is improving as well. Core banking, I think there's still a lot of catching up to do there. All of the big banks are on legacy infrastructure. And look, I would actually defer to Alex to talk about core banking. He's got more experience in that area than I do. But I think that, I see that Thought Machine is part of this. And there's certainly a lot of opportunity to move core banking forward. And I think that the encouraging thing is that APRA, the regulator, is now, open about enabling new entrants into the market to leverage core banking in the cloud. And then also we're seeing the new lending platforms as well, new cloud lending platforms. So I think kind of the rails are getting much better, the payment rails, the data rails. The core infrastructure is starting to improve, but I think there's a real opportunity there, which I think a lot of the new entrants to this market are actually gonna help drive for Australian institutions.
Alex, I'm going to throw straight to you on that one, because I think that's an important point that David raises, is that the core banking rails here have been slow at evolving, but there's a lot of change coming through, not just the banking space, but there is particularly in the banking space at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Australia is made up of 4 big banks. They've got mainly legacy-grown core banking platforms that are, creaking at the seams. The investment case for changing them is difficult, and you'll see that all of them are dabbling in this space. They're all trying different pilots and different ways of creating a future state that works. CBA probably led the way in, they had a core banking platform, put a decent middleware layer in there and did a good front end. NAB went the other way around, trying to do a back end replacement that
rip and replace.
Yeah, which was
nearly killed everyone.
Yeah, very, very nearly. And then had a sort of parallel strategy with Ubank, which was like create the new sub brand on the new platform and then eventually migrate over. But as you know, every single bank that I know of in Australia now is looking at an alternative banking platform in some way or another. But there's the trouble with from a core banking perspective in Australia is once you get past the big 4, the scale just isn't there, right? So you're into the small regional players and the mutuals and the others. There's quite a lot of them, and there's probably 60 or 70 ADI licenses or banking licenses out there. But you know, they're in the, you know, from a UK terms, you know, they're in the small building society bracket. You know, 20, 30 branches, you know, that sort of stuff. So it's you know, and they're actually reasonably well served by an organisation called Cuscal, which is the sort of their middleman that does a sort of does a lot of the heavy lifting on a lot of their technology and payments. But sort of changing tack slightly, building on what David said, the one thing I would also say to people is Australia, from a digital perspective, in every angle, does the basics well in most industries, and does them really well in a few, really well. I mean, you know, a good example is payments. You know, Australian has led the revolution in contactless payments, you know, and has 70 or 80% of all payments in Australia now on a contactless device of some sort, whether it's a chip and pin or whether it's a mobile wallet. You know, and that's unheard of in most other geographies. But you've got the MPP, then the payment platform coming along off the back of that as well. And so it is quite tempting sometimes, you know, and I did it start off with, you sort of think about Australia as a sort of 12,000 miles around the planet, must be a bit of a backwater. It really isn't. You know, there's some really good stuff gets done down here, and which means also there's a for those that have got the right proposition, there's great opportunities to leverage on and get introductions for.
Yeah, and just occasionally things get launched here and then do very well overseas as well. We see that from time to time. I wouldn't say it's the norm, but there's certainly from time to time. Josephine, I have looked and talked with the banking sector about how to improve how they do things for about 20 years. And in my role at ABNF, that was what we did at ABNF. We talked to the top people and the experts and said, right, how's that going to improve? How are you going to fix that? What are you thinking about that improvement? But to me, it still appears to me that the banking sector and the financial services sector generally is still a very siloed proposition. And one of the biggest problems that the financial services sector has, which is the largest largest industry sector in Australia, is it still operates along many silos. Even one financial institution can have 15, 20 different departments, and often they don't work together and don't speak together and don't share data together. Do you still find that as a characteristic of the Australian marketplace? And if so, how do you navigate that and how do you see that as an opportunity as a fintech coming into Australia?
I think one of the things I think the whole fintech and innovation hub that a lot of the banks have set up, I think one of the key roles that they are supposed to play is really to bring innovation into the bank and actually to talk through and cut through different silos and be the coordination. So I think one way to get around it in some way is to go via the innovation route, and obviously through the community like FinTech Australia or the community of the, you know, Stone and Chalk, where they have all the innovation managers from the banks and get them to be the one to coordinate and position it accordingly. That could be one, instead of you coming through as an official vendor and then try to coordinate all the talks. For me, that would be how I would play it if you are really a sort of startup and playing the innovation play. Other than that, I think I'll let the rest of the panel talk about how they're going to cut through the silos.
David, how can you help fintechs cut through the silos and navigate across what can be large and complex financial institutions? Even the smaller ones can be quite difficult to navigate, can't they?
Yeah, look, the small ones actually are not that difficult to navigate. You generally can find the right person pretty easily. All, you know, it's out there all on LinkedIn. They're selling their titles. They're generally open for a chat. I find that the smaller banks, or at least the neobanks, are always open for a chat, because part of it's learning. A lot of times what they're interested in is not necessarily buying from you, but learning, you know, what your product is, what else other people are doing in the market. So there's that angle. Selling to big banks in Australia is really, really hard. I think you just have to front up to it. if you're targeting like enterprise banks in Australia, I think there's a couple of things that you need to kind of face into. One is that the sales cycle is going to be twice as long as you think it is. So, you know, if you're used to doing deals in 6 to 9 months, plan on it being 18 months, and hopefully you'll do one in that time. The other thing is that you need to resource for the kind of deals that you're going to be doing. So I've seen a number of companies that want to sell to large institutions and will hire a single salesperson in Australia and think that that's what it's going to take. When in reality, what a bank wants to see when they're buying is they want the pre-salesperson to front up to meetings and help draw the architecture. They want the salesperson. They want the solution architect on shore. They want a customer success person on shore. You know, it's probably like in COVID, maybe that's lessening a little bit because everything is virtual anyway, but I wouldn't bank on it. So I think that you kind of have to front up, you know, and Josephine's mentioned a couple of times about the budget that you need to sell. You just need to front up to the fact that it's going to take longer than you expect it to. And it's generally going to require a higher number of resources than what you expect. So I think those are two things to lean into. Now, if I just think about how AWS can help, we've got a number of programs. One of the ones we use quite often is called the Connections Program. So I work with the enterprise account managers to help introduce our customers into their accounts. Sometimes it's successful. You know, if you're selling a technology solution into technologists, then AWS is really good at that because that's who our stakeholders are. If you're selling a solution into the head of risk or the P&L owner for asset finance, then we'll have a crack. But I think it also goes back to Josephine's point around just leveraging networks and leveraging partners. And ultimately, like AWS is very motivated to help our customers sell into enterprises. I mean, there's a really mercenary opportunity there. Like the more you're selling into enterprises, the more you're spending on AWS. So there's that, but also, you know, one of our core values is earning trust with customers, and it's a great earns trust exercise. So we will help, but I think ultimately it's just about understanding that it's probably going to take longer and be more expensive to require more resources to do the deal than you can, and you're going to have to accept that fact. And better to accept it up front than a year down the track when you've kind of spent a whole bunch of revs. And we kind of come into that realization then.
Excellent. Craig, very quickly, there's some harsh lessons in there for our participants about being honest about their approach here, isn't there? Is that what you're hearing out of this discussion and the discussions we've heard earlier?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think to David's point, it's so important to understand that I've sold into a lot of these banks. I've sold different technologies into these banks. Some of these banks take 6 months to initiate an MSA, you know, which is a, you know, managed service agreement. So, you know, to David's point, there is a significant amount of time allocated to sell into those banks. It's important to have the right resources. So, you know, rather than, you know, I would consider that you would need a pod to kick things off. A pod could be a pre-sales engineer and an AE. And then in the background, you would have the corporate entity facilitating the customer support, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think you generally need to have them here from day one. So it would be more a land and expand model where you would start with something, the connections are there, people that know people, and build partnerships. You know, to everyone's point, the partners are really important. One of the things that I've tried to do with the companies I've brought down here is to very quickly look at that as a go-to-market strategy. You know, how can I partner up with people, build this ecosystem, and then based on my ecosystem, I should have enough people to ask about a problem I might not know how to solve. You know, let's go to the experts and ask them, how will we go about doing this? You know, pick up the phone to David, pick up the phone to Alex, have a chat. You know, where should I go to do this? They're the sorts of things that are important. So yes, it takes time, it does take money, but it's far better to understand that up front. And as I said, that blueprint that you develop based on your research is something you can give to the executive team because you are going to need funding if you're going to do expansion properly. You can't do it on a shoestring.
Beautiful segue, Craig, into my next question for Alex, which is, and Alex, you mentioned this before, but I just want to unpack it a little further. How do you keep the investors engaged? Because for so many of our fintechs, they're going to be down here for a while before they hit their first home run and have commercial success. Defining their runway is probably an important thing, but how do you keep those investors engaged? You'd have some real experience in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about building a believable pipeline. It's all about doing what you said you would do, and being able to demonstrate progress. Those are the three things. There's no rocket science in it. The one piece of advice I was going to give as I was listening to Craig earlier on is, particularly if you're talking to the big banks, is find a proposition that it's easy for them to say yes to.
Yes.
That's the real secret. So if you can produce a pilot that doesn't require huge amounts of integration, or even better still, something that could be purchased by the CMO, who has a vast budget normally, and doesn't and doesn't have to go through the procurement process.
Or risk and compliance. Don't go to risk and compliance. They've never got any money.
No, that's right. I was, if you package stuff up in a way that people can easily purchase through bite-sized pieces, a low risk, where they don't have to, go to the 97 committees and, swear in blood that it's, being signed off by, every cyber expert in the world. Yeah. Then you've got a chance, right? Then you can, even if you have to give it away for free, you can actually find that you can, you build relationships and you build trust through that process. And you might be able to shave 50% off of your 18-month timeline to sell the real thing if you do things like that. Or you could, I've seen so many folk that have ended up in the, the PowerPoint doomsday of, and there's another meeting, and there's another meeting, and there's another, and you need to meet so-and-so, and, go through that. So you want to try and cut that out as much as possible, and take something that they can say yes to very quickly, and so a junior burger can say yes to quite quickly. So that's why some sort of pilot, some sort of low risk thing, some sort of no cost model, or that's the way to think about it, and that's the way to sell into the organisations here.
It's funny, last night we had some commercial sessions, and we had two of the incubator or innovation hubs, and land and expand was the term that everybody was very comfortable with. Now, I used to think somehow that the consultants, that was a derogatory term to saying this is our strategy, we land and then we expand, but it seems to be a way to really navigate through a larger institution. Josephine, are you comfortable with the term land and expand, and is it a recognised strategy still today?
And can I just add to Alex, Andrew, with regards to communicating to the buyer? I just want to talk about this difference between an existing market and a new market. So this is very specific to the new startup. For example, Thought Machine is a core banking platform, or a neobank that Alex is in. It's very clear is an existing market, and you are actually entering it differently with a differentiation. But there are startups now that are actually creating new market and new categories. And for such companies, like for example, VoxSmart, I believe, communication surveillance, right? I mean, what is that? I mean, that didn't exist before. There was no such problem, I think before, till there's so disparate channels of communication that now you need a communication surveillance, right, as a category. Yep. So for companies and startups that are actually creating new categories, they actually need to first sell the problem that they are solving and why is it important. And therefore, this is the category before they start to sell the product functionality and features and the technology. Because unless the client accepts that this is an important problem to solve, and I need to create a budget for it, they're not going to find the vendor to actually, solve the problem. So the category of what it is and what the problem, why is it important, need to be communicated first before they start to sell blah, 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 product functional technology and blah, blah, AI. Do you know what I mean?
It's a really good point. Uli, in our research session earlier today, highlighted that point, but I think you've articulated that particularly well. And David, and also Craig, can I both ask you, are you able to help in the research on those sorts of things? I know, Craig, that's an important element of the research component, isn't it?
Correct, absolutely it is. And, you know, understanding the product fit, the market, and how to bring the two together, to Josephine's point. It's so important to have and know that, and ensure that you've tried and tested it. So, you know, many occasions I've bought new technologies down here that, you know, we've tried to create a new niche, and we've tried to present it, and in the end, it didn't work. So it was better for us to learn that early in the cycle than it was to continue to burn cash. So we made that call and said, no, this is not going to work, and we're out. So you've got to, you know, you really got to think that through and make sure you fundamentally understand. And you'll get a lot of experience, I would think, in the markets that you've been successful in. So, you know, if you have been operating in the United Kingdom, or you have been operating in, let's say, the United States, for instance, there's a lot to be learned in those markets. So, you know, adapting them here for the local market is imperative.
Yeah, really good point. And David, I might go to you on that point. How flexible and adaptable are Australians to things that have worked in other markets, and you've just sort of tweaked them a little bit? Is that a characteristic you think is you know, potentially successful here in Australia?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that in certain instances, the answer would be yes. I mean, again, it goes back to my response around where talking about kind of known customer case studies. So where you have a known customer case study or a known customer story that you can relate to the Australian market, then yeah, I think that Australians will be open to it. Australians are also probably pretty proud about kind of the way that their banking systems that their financial system is run, and about the quirks of the financial system, and really about some of the ways that the Australian financial system is ahead of others. So, you know, Alex made the point about contactless payments previously. You know, I see customers trying to enter the market because they've got a great QR code payment solution. It's just not really going to work here. Or somebody coming, you know, taking the Alipay solution, which is, you know, one of the most innovative payment companies in the world. But because of the way that merchant payments works in Australia, it's not, and because credit cards are so ubiquitous, that's not really going to work here. So I think it's less a question of if they're open to it or not. I think they are open to it. You just have to know the market, and know kind of how your solution fits into that. And then the one other point that I would make, just adding on what everyone else has said, is that you don't have to spend too much time reading the headlines to understand what's important to banks and insurance companies in Australia these days. I mean, they're provisioning upwards of $1 billion for losses that are going to be coming in. You know, Westpac basically spilled their CEO and has a multi-billion-dollar fine because of issues with international payments. So, you know, unless you have a really compelling value prop that's really going to accelerate growth, or you have a really good story around how you can help with remediation or covering losses or helping with responsible lending, you just need to be mindful of what the focus of banks are right now. And that, you know, if you're tangential to those, you might get a look in, but it's going to be a lot harder than if you can really target those core needs that banks in Australia are very explicitly facing into right now.
Yeah, some really good points there. We've got 5 minutes left. Any questions from attendees, please fire them in now. I've just got one more question that I want to ask all of you is when to partner and when to compete. That's a really important one that comes up and is obviously a tricky question for startups because, you know, clearly the resources aren't there. And so, Alex, is there any easy guide to when to partner and when to compete, when to just, as you've said, offer your products and services at a lower cost to just get that market traction? Is there anything that, any tips that you could give our attendees?
Well, I think where you've got the opportunity to drive credibility and scale, you know, partner as much as you can. Where you don't have those, then, you know, I would go for the easy purchase option. My only word of caution, and it's a word of caution in a good note, is that, you know, The one thing that you can say about the Australian banks is they're like penguins. And what I mean by that is, you know, you see them standing on the edge. They're all standing on the edge. And once one goes, they all go.
I remember I worked with a technology company for a short while, and we called them suicidal tortoises. They're going to get there, but they do it very slowly. Josephine, when to partner and when to compete?
Compete? I don't really get a question.
Well,
I think that, yeah, go ahead.
Going head to head against another technology company, or going head to head against a financial services company that's got a value proposition that customers might like, but they may be just doing it really badly. When do you partner with them, and when do you compete? Is there any sort of tips for that one?
No. I think that it needs to be in strategic alignment. I think whatever you do and however you decide, it needs to be in alignment with strategically, you know, where you want to go. What does it mean? As long as you're conscious of why you do what you do, I think that should guide whether you partner or you're going to reduce your price or you're going to do something different. I mean, that's probably like the more generic answer, but I think that's really, from my perspective, that's how I would approach it. It's really has to be in alignment with where you want to go. Does it play to your strength? Is it going to impede you in the future? Is it going to come back and bite you? I think that's going to be important, because at the end of the game, again, it's about trust. It's about the reputation. It's about, can you take it back? You know, all this thing. And again, if you could partner, that will always be great, because as a startup, again, if you don't have the reputation and the credibility and all, the more you add in terms of partnership and collaboration, it really strengthens the offering, I think, for the first few sales, I think, in market.
Fantastic. David, any further tips on partnering or competing before we close the session?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a consumer brand, especially, I think that what we're seeing is a lot of market entrants are ending up partnering. So Klarna with CBA is one example. TransferWise with Upbank is another example, where you have these global brands that are looking to, for partnership distribution opportunities as a way to accelerate. I think those, I would look at what they're doing. They're very, very well-known brands, both over $5 billion in valuation. So I think those are good examples of where you would want to partner. Yeah, I mean, don't try to compete directly with, big banks on a direct consumer proposition. Because you won't be able to. I think that where you can compete is often, you're seeing monoline lenders, I think, doing a good job of competing, but most of them are Australian born. Judo's a great example. Athena's another example. Mula, Prospa, they're very targeted monoline lenders. Where you see people trying to do multi-product brands and jump straight into the market, I think that's where you can struggle a little bit.
Excellent. Craig, I'll leave the final word to you. Some great tips in this session here. There's been a lot on focus. Networks, partnerships, how to explore the Australian market. Any other closing comments before we wrap it up?
No, look, I think, if you're looking to, come into this part of the market, into this market here in Australia, I think it's fundamentally important to have people that are networked, that are connected, that do understand the landscape. People that you can trust and that can take you on the journey, because, as I said, use the land and expand methodology. You can start small, and the important thing is that you can scale. So you need to be in a position where, rather than hiring 10 people and then worrying about where I'm going to get my first deal, you're far better to look at, okay, who can I partner with that can help me build my pipeline, help me understand the landscape, build my asset base, which is, the number of connections and contacts in the marketplace, and then look to, expand that out and grow. And that's something that Newfound has done very, very well for a lot of organizations here. Part of my role is the execution piece, which is to help those organizations who are willing to do that or wishing to do that.
Excellent. Perfect finish to the panel there, Craig. It's like you've been reading my notes, because tomorrow's session is all about getting ready to scale. And there's no doubt that financial services is a scale business. Very hard to make a lot of money in financial services with the thin margins that you operate on these days. In the Australian context, where there's only 25 million people and a lot of competition, that's vitally important. So that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I'd like to thank all of our panel members for some great insights there. Some real, really good, valuable pieces of information, well packaged, I thought. But thank you so much for all of you panel members. We hope that you're able to provide contact details through Newfound so that people can ask you questions if they have some later on. I'd like to thank you and let you go and have a great evening here in Australia. And for those of you that are connected, have a great morning. And we're going to see you tomorrow. We've got a really strong session on getting ready to scale, talking about open banking, the data regulatory environment we're going to. There's some great opportunities there, but it's a very technical session. And it should be a really good session tomorrow morning. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much and have a good evening or a good morning. Good night.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.